Hi YouTube, welcome or welcome back to the channel. My name is Kain, and in today's video, I'll hopefully give you guys the best, most informative, most in-depth champion pool guide on the entire internet for the mid lane specifically. I know that's a big promise to live up to, and I'll try my very best. And the way we're going to do it is, first I'm going to give you guys some guidance on what a champion pool should look like, how many champions you need in your champion pool, things like that, what are good champions to pick up, and so on. Now that's just what a standard YouTube video would do as well. So we're going to do that. We're going to go with the bare minimum here, but on top of that, we're going to talk about every single champion in detail. So here you have a list of all the different classes in mid lane. We're going to cut that list up into like a more defined way of, for example, the first class, control mages. So we're going to put them into 4 different categories. Then we're going to define that even more by trying to make every single champion have its own tier. So we're going to have to go through a lot today, or over a lot today. And yeah, we'll start with the beginning. And that's the guidance for the champion pool. Okay, so before I'm going to spend an entire video explaining to you what each and every champion is and what they bring to the table and why you might want to pick them up in your champion pool, first I'm going to talk about how to make a champion pool and how to put champions in your champion pool. Because many people already know what type of champions they like and who they would like to play, but they don't know if they should add them in their champion pool or not. So first and foremost, let me say that there is not one rule. I've written 5 rules here, ironically, but there is not one rule that you should use. You should play what you like to play, and I've seen people climb to Challenger and to High Elo in general, both with broad, wide champion pools and with one tricking. So it doesn't really matter. You should mainly do what works for you and enjoy what you're doing. That's the main important part. However, for the sake of this video, I'm going to try and give you my opinion on the most ideal way to set up a champion pool. So for the entire video, I'm going to share with you what champions you might like and what they bring to the table. Now we're going to talk about how to put them in a champion pool. What do I mean with that? Well, it's very simple. Let's say that after watching the entire video, you say, okay, I like Vladimir. He sounds fun. Cassiopeia sounds fun. Akali sounds fun. And perhaps you say Katarina sounds fun. 4 champions, not too many champions, only 4. That's my champion pool. Well, I would say, okay, yeah, sure. You know what those champions, you understand them now. So you can't say that you like all of them, but I wouldn't necessarily apply them or use them in the same champion pool. Why not? Because of this slide here. I made this one specifically for extra guidance here. I'm also going to remove some things off screen here. There we go. So, because now you're going to see if you like Katarina and Cassio, you like Vladimir and Akali as well. These are 4 champions in the same category. And that could be a problem, or is it, right? Well, that's what we're going to talk about right now. And yes, it's going to be a problem. That's going to be a hint. Okay. Now, something I also want to mention, and it's going to be quite important, is that also, let me quickly finish my P here. Okay, there. So something that's very important to mention is that right from the get-go, you do not need a champion from each and every category. It could be very easy to assume that you need an OTP champ here, you need a mage champ, you need an easy-to-play champ, like... You don't. There's not a specific type of champion that you need to have a well-rounded champion pool. I don't believe in that. However, we're automatically going to create that, or like something similar to almost having every single champion in your champion pool, by following these 5 steps. Right? So these 5 steps. That's what we're going to do, and that's going to give us a well-rounded champion pool. So I'm going to act like I'm going to add my own champion pool here, or create my own champion pool. Now, Vladimir is the favorite champion in the game for me. So of course I want to play Vladimir. It's that simple. The problem is Vladimir is an OTP champion. My first rule is that you should only have 1 to 2, maximum 2 OTP champions in your champion pool. Why? It costs you a lot of time and effort to learn these champions, either because they're mechanical or because they're like, you need to know their limits to make them work in solo queue. So ideally in these champions, you can invest 100% of your time, or like a lot of percent in your time. Now, if you have, for example, you play Vladimir, and you play Katarina, and you play Akali, and you play Cassio, then you can only put 25% of your time in each of these champions. But every single champion should require like an insane amount of time and effort, and not just 1/4 of your time. So you see how that can be a problem. They're all very difficult champions to learn, so you shouldn't put all your time and effort into learning 4 of these champions. Just pick 1, ideally, or maximum 2. right? Now, we're going to talk about that in just a bit here. So let's say for now, I pick Vladimir. He's my most favorite champion in the game. Okay, nothing wrong with that. I would also say that ideally you have a complementary champion, right? I didn't want to write it out full because I'm lazy. But yeah, there we go. So a complementary champion. What do I mean with that? I'm going to use that term for opposite champion in this video. I mean with that an opposite champion. Now, what do I mean with that? So if you play a champion like Vladimir, right? If I one-trick him, for example, right? What is going to be the problem? Well, if I one-trick him and I only play Vladimir, I can easily get counter-picked. For example, the enemy team locks in Orianna, right? They blind pick Orianna. And I see that they pick Orianna, and I know that that's a very bad matchup for me as Vladimir. Well, I could say, hey, I'm not going to pick Vladimir because it's a bad matchup, but I OTP Vladimir. I only play Vladimir, so I'm going to have to pick him anyway, and then get destroyed by Orianna. Or maybe be so good on Vladimir that I can maybe win the matchup or go even. Right? But you see, right from the get-go, you're basically already in a losing situation because you can only play one champion. Can you climb like that? Yes, you can climb to Challenger like that. Right? But from an ideal perspective, I would say that you try to avoid situations like this, where you pick Vladimir in a very bad matchup for yourself. So, what do we do then? Well, if you know that the enemies want to pick something like Orianna, well, then you could say, okay, Vladimir sucks in Orianna. Why? Well, because Orianna is a lane-dominant champion, and Vladimir is weak in the early game because he's a scaling champion. So that means that most of the time, champions that Vladimir will struggle into are lane-dominant champions. So like typically the mages or even assassins. So what are champions then that perform well into mages or into assassins, so that when I get countered as Vladimir, or like when people pick like a bad matchup for me as Vladimir, I can pick an assassin into it. Well, right, assassins would be very good into mages or into other assassins, right? So if they pick Orianna, I could go with an assassin, or I could go with another mage, depending on what I like. Now, most mages are good into other mages. Assassins are typically also good in mages. So if you say, hey, I enjoy assassins more than mages, go for assassins. If you go for mages, well, that's completely fine as well. Now, I prefer assassins above mages, so I'm going to go with an assassin. But which one? Well, I personally went with Akali, and you can already see that that's not super smart. I just like Akali that much. Why is it not super smart to go with Akali? Well, let me remove some. There we go. So they pick Orianna, or they can pick things like Orianna. I don't want to pick Vladimir, so I pick something that's good in Orianna, or I have something in my champion pool that's good against mages or other assassins. So then Akali would do the trick. The problem is if I play Akali, now I can only put 50%, right? 50% in both Akali and Vladimir. And I just told you that these are champions that require the majority of your time and effort. So ideally, I don't want to split all my time and effort into two of these champions that require so much time. So that's not ideal. Now, I could be smart and say, hey, I'm not going to pick like an assassin from the OTP champions. Maybe there's an assassin that's easier to play from this category, right? And then what we could do is, rather than going with Akali, I could go with something like Fizz. He's an assassin and he's AP and he's easy to play. If I want an AD assassin, then I could go Neferi. Both of these champions are good options. I could also go with Echo, for example. All good options. But then that would make a lot more sense, because now I can put still like, I don't know, 80% of time into Vladimir. And now I can put like 20%, so the rest of my time, into either Fizz, Neferi, or Echo. And that's okay to only put 20% of time and effort into those champions, because I mainly play Vladimir anyway. And when I play these champions, they should be relatively easy to pick up because they're easy to play. So easy to play champions are very well combined with OTP champions in the same champion pool. However, like I said, I didn't do that. I said, okay, yes, that's all good, but I don't like Fizz, I don't like Neferi, and I really love Akali. So I'm going to go with Akali anyway, knowing that it's also fine to have two max OTP, two OTP champions maximum, right? It's fine to have that. It's not ideal, but it's fine. It's not it's fine. So I went with that for my champion pool. Again, not ideal, but it's completely fine. Okay, so that is rule number 1, and rule number 2, the complementary champion. Let's go to rule number 3, and that is have a similar champion in your champion pool. So again, I'm going to go to the Vladimir example. I play Vladimir right now. And so far, I already picked Akali because I like her so much, and it's okay because I can pick up to 2 maximum OTP champions. Okay, then now I need a similar champion. I need a champion that is very similar, so not complementary, but similar to my champion. Why is that? Well, not only do we have to prepare ourselves for situations where we can get countered by the enemy, we also have to prepare ourselves for situations where our champion gets banned. So what if I can't play it? The enemy team bans Vladimir and I cannot play him. What do I do then? Well, ideally, if I can't play Vladimir, I can always go back to Akali, but ideally, since I put so much time and effort into Vladimir, right, I can play a champion that's very similar to him, similar playstyle. So like something like Aesol, for example, also a scaling champion. Additionally, he's easy to play, which is amazing. What else can scale? Ryze. Ryze can also scale very well, so I could also pick up Ryze. He's also quite similar. Now, I don't like Ryze that much because he's more of a counter pick / niche champion, so I won't be able to pick him, or he will not be optimal in each and every single game. Aesol will also not be optimal in each and every single game, but he will be good for the majority of the games, so he's more pickable, right? He's not as niche or counter pick as possible, so he's a similar type of playstyle. He's easy to play, and he's not really a niche or counter pick champion, so I can pick him in many games if Vladimir is banned. So that's also good. So then from that perspective, I would say that if I wanted to pick up a similar champion, I would go with Aesol, and I do believe that's good. And again, do I have to put a lot of time and effort into Aesol? No, maybe only 20%, because he's an easy to play champion, so I would learn him easily. And I only pick him when Vladimir is banned, so I don't have to put a lot of time and effort into playing him. So that is something that you can keep in mind as well. That is our third rule. So having a similar pick. Number 4 stands for counter picking. I do believe that it is important to counter pick. So that's why we have this entire row. Right? That's why we have this entire row. Now, every single champion in this game can be a counter pick to a specific champion. Right? So that's not a problem. Like Vladimir could be a counter into a certain champion. But these are champions that, for the majority of League, over all the different metas, have consistently been champions that normally are only picked to counter somebody else. Right? So I would say that if you want to counter a specific playstyle, picking one of these champs is going to be amazing. So what do I like to say here? It's a bit controversial, but I would say that you can play almost every one of these champions. And the reason for it is this. If you play 100 League games, maybe and only 15% of the games will you be in a game where you can last pick or where you can like completely counter the enemy team. That is like 15 games, right? So in 15 games on 100, that's maybe only in that small amount of games can you fully counter the enemy team. But then I would, because that could give you very high win rate by fully countering the enemy team. So then I would say that you learn to play these champions just a little bit. You just practice them like a little bit. And then, for example, if the enemy team has Akali or they have Sylas, then I could pick Vex, because Vex does very well into both Sylas, into Akali. She does well versus Irelia. She does well versus Yasuo, things like that, right? So Vex could be very good in like champions who want to engage onto you and have like high mobility, right? Let's say they pick Sylas or Akali, right? Then I could also pick Galio, right? That's another option. Let's say the entire enemy team is full AP or like a lot of AP, and I have a free scaling lane. Like the enemy team picks Aesol. What stops me then from picking Kassadin? Because he's good against AP champions, right? And if he has a free lane to scale, then his game is going to be extremely good. So you can pick Kassadin in that type of game, right? You could also pick, let's say, if the enemy team is they're all very short range and they play champions like, I don't know, like short range champions in the team fight. So you're going to have like easy team fight AoE damage. Then you can go with Ryze, for example. Could be a good pick. Or let's say they pick in lane something like Akali or like a short melee range champion like Yone. Well, then you could, for example, pick Pantheon, because Pantheon would do a very good job of beating those two. Right? So those are really, really good options to counter enemies. Let's say the enemy team picks Fiddlesticks or Alistar, so like, or Malphite, and the enemy team picks Malphite. You could pick Sylas, because Sylas can steal the Malphite R, and that could be very, very valuable. But maybe that will only happen, like those clear options of really countering an entire team will only happen in maybe 15% of your games. And that means on 100 games, that's maybe 3 games that you play Malphite yourself, or that you play 4 games of Silas, and then 3 games of Vex, and then, I don't know, right? Like 4 games of Galio and 1 game of Pantheon. That's like 15 games in total that you countered the enemy team. Okay, but then do you see that you need to put like a little, like only little time and effort into learning the champion? Because look, 3 games of Malphite on 100 games is not worth learning how to play Malphite, right? 4 games on 100 for Silas is not worth on putting a lot of time and effort into learning Silas, right? And it keeps on going. So in total, I would say that if you spend 10% of your time and effort in all of these champions in total, then that is completely enough by me. But it is good if you can tap into these champions every now and then, because having a clear counter to the enemy team could be very valuable and could boost your win rate up. But this is purely from a like super ideal champion pool perspective, right? Keep that in mind. All right, and then I'm going to clear up the screen here a little bit. Let's see, to make it less overwhelming. All right, there we go. Okay, and then we're going to talk about the last rule, or maybe the semi-last rule, because I also want to talk about AD. AD plus AP. That's rule number 6, maybe. But yeah, that's what I want to talk about as well. But first, let's go talk about the limits. So there are certain limits. We already talked about if you go with OTP champions, it's very good to tap into the easy to play champions, because these require a lot of time and effort, like 100% basically, and these only like 10%. So then a good trade-off would be to do 90% on one of these champs and the other remaining 10% in one of these champs, and that would be a very good champion pool. But you see, if you want to main OTP champs, it's best to like only play 1 or 2 champs, right? And combine it with easy to play champions, for example. That's just logical. That's a limit when you play OTP champs. That's a limiting factor. You don't want to play too many advanced champions. You don't want to pick up like 5 of these champions. That's a limit. Then 2 is also here. In the counterpick / niche, there is a limit in the sense that I just told you that I think it's good if you can play the majority of them. Like just a little bit, you don't have to main them. But you don't want to main them, right? That's the entire idea. I think there's a limit on maining these champions, right? If you're a Kassadin main, you're going to have many games where you might have to play versus something like an Irelia, right? Or a Nefiri, or those type of champions. And then your laning phase might be very difficult. And again, it's not going to be ideal. Counterpick / niche champions are super optimal in certain games, but then they're really bad or not ideal in the big majority of games. So maining one of these champions typically means that, yeah, if you main Kassadin, you're going to have many suboptimal games. Or if you main, I don't know, like Galio mid lane, you're going to have many suboptimal games. You're going to have super good games and then many suboptimal ones. So you don't really want to main a counterpick champion. How can you fix this? Well, basically, again, by maining one of these champions, right? Starting with, okay, maybe you like Silas the most from these. I don't know. You start with him, or let's say Galio, and you look at an alternative, right? You look at alternatives. So you start building your champion pool just like I told you, right? Okay, you like Galio. So what do you need? A complementary champion. Okay, you go find your complementary champion. You need to find your similar champion. Okay, you go find your similar champion, right? You need to find a counter pick. Okay, right? Then you just learn to play all of these, right? But that's basically how it goes. You can start maining each and every single champion as long as you follow the other rules, right? Now, also, you could say if I main Silas, is it that bad? Not necessarily, no, right? It's not that bad. Like, I might be exaggerating when I say like you can definitely not one-trick one of these. You can, and some people do it, but it might not be ideal from a very optimizing perspective of your champion pool. Now, again, what you could do is also main 2 of these, right? Maybe with the opposite direction. So like Pantheon, Malphite is really good in like AD champions, like with attack speed, like Yasuo, Irelia, Tryndamere, whatever, right? Those type of champions, like Yone, right? So then Malphite could be a good option versus those champions, but you don't want to main Malphite mid, because if they go if they go like Silas and the enemy team, you might get countered, right? So then maybe next to maining Malphite, what's the opposite of Malphite, right? Well, you could probably go with something like Kassadin. He shines and scales in AP versus AP lanes, right? Or maybe with Galio, right? So that's how you can also approach your champion pool here. But as a limiting factor, I would say ideally you do not main any of these. You do not main them, right? But you do know how to play all of them as a counter pick option, but you don't want to main any of them, right? Unless you main them and you go through the entire process of finding a complementary champion, a similar champion, a counter pick. If you do that, then you will also be fine. But you don't want to one-trick one of these, ideally, right? That's what I'm saying. Okay, that's it for the limits. Then we go to the last rule, and that's AD plus AP. Generally speaking, it's good to have both AD and AP champions in your team. How do you do that? Again, you start from a champion that you like. So I like a Vladimir, right? But he happens to be AP champion. Okay, we go to the process. I need a complementary champion. So a champion that does the opposite of Vladimir, right? Could be a mage, could be an assassin. Well, I really like assassins, right? Ideally, I don't go for this. I did like Akali, so I went for her. But ideally, you don't go for here. You look for assassins in other regions and other tiers. So I find assassins here. So Echo, we have Neferi, we have Fizz, right? And ideally, they are easy to play. Ideally, I look in that type of tier because this is an OTP champ and they synergize very well with easy to play champs. Okay, so I'm in the right category. I go for the right synergy, and this is an AP, so I need AD. So now I just use Neferi, right? So Fizz and Echo are out of the race. It's now only Neferi. And then that could be my AD assassin, right? Maybe I don't want to, right? Maybe I say, like, I don't know, like, I'm going to go with Fizz. Well, then I can go to my similar champion, which would be Aesol, right? Maybe there's an AD champion who does very well in like team fights or whatever. And then you look to pick your AD champion, right? Now I will pick Neferi here because I would like Neferi the most, I think, from these assassins then. So I would go with Neferi. So that's our AD pick. And then we go to a similar champion like Aesol, for example. And now I have AP, and then here I have AD, which is completely fine, right? That's the way how you can approach it, right? So that could be very, very good. All right, so that's how you find AD and AP mixes. Maybe I can give you guys one more tip. So let's say you want to main Fizz. Fizz is the champion that you like the most in the game. You want to main Fizz. Okay, you need to find a complementary champion. How do you do it? Right, what's the opposite of Fizz? Well, something that's not assassin type and is more team fight oriented, right? So something like that could be, so Fizz is AP, right? Something like that could actually be Vladimir, right? Because we went from Vladimir to Fizz, right? So something like that could be Vladimir, for example, more team fight oriented. It could also be a mage. So let's say we go with a mage right now. So Nico has like a very big AoE ult with engage. So it could be Nico, right? So then I go for Nico. But Nico is also AP. So now in my similar type of champion, maybe I go for an AD champion. So my similar type of champion would also be an assassin, right? Or like something that's similar to it. So I could go with Zed, right? I could also go with Neferi. But since I already have easy to play champion, and like Nico is also like, these are fine champions, you don't have to put that much time into them to learn them. I have time and effort to put into Zed, so I could pick up Zed here. And then Zed, Fizz, Nico would be a great champion pool, for example, right? So that's how you start building your champion pools, right? So keep that in mind. All right, with that being said, let's move on to the rest of this video. Now we're going to go a lot more in depth and talk about all the different mid lane type of champions, and we're going to categorize or try to categorize every single champion in its specific tier. That way you will know what every single champion can bring to the table and why you can consider playing it. This is for the people who need a little bit less guidance. Because then you can decide basically if you want to pick it up yourself or not, right? Whether it's an OTP champ or not. Okay, but let's get started. So in the mid lane we have 5 categories, right? Mages, assassins, AD bruisers and fighters. I made one category out of this. Tanks and utility champions. This is also one category. And then hybrid/marksman or hybrid marksman. That is also one category. So 5 categories. Now, mages are typically like if you want to pick up a mage or you're considering picking up a mage, there's a very big versatility, but in general, these are champions that are AP. So they are all about ability power and ability rotation. So you're not going to deal a lot of damage consistently most of the time. Some of these mages will, but generally speaking, mages are more oriented around their abilities, and then they do some abilities. They wait for 5 seconds for their abilities to come up again, and then they're useful again. That's generally speaking, mages. They also scale pretty well, so the longer the game goes on, they typically become stronger, and in the early game, they might struggle a bit. All right, then we have assassins. Assassins are very, very strong. They typically accelerate in killing people in the 1v1, so killing your direct lane opponent, or picking off enemy squishy targets. They're not necessarily the best team fighting champions, and they don't scale the best necessarily. They are more for like really early game damage and picking off enemies in the 1v1 or 1v2 or 2v2 situations rather than team fighting. Then we have the AD Bruisers and Fighters. These are typically champions that are played more in the top lane, but you can definitely play them in the mid lane. The benefit of them is that they are AD. Most mid laners, as you can see, are AP. If you need an AD champion, you can pick one of these. And these champions are typically, defined by, they won't die instantly. They can really like get up in the enemy's face. Like you just jump onto them, hit them, run them down, rather than doing one ability rotation and getting out. It's more like you really run down your opponent. And you have a bit more survivability than most mages. You don't have to be scared of like getting run down because you typically run down your opponent. All right, then we go to the tanks and utility champions. These are just champions that, purely from a perspective of dealing damage, you won't deal that much damage. It's more about tanking enemy damage and peeling your teammates. So these picks could be very, very useful if you need something in your team where, let's say, your entire team is full damage and you need to peel your ADC, or you need a tank or engage. You can pick one of these champions. And then we have the hybrid marksman. That's the last category of champions in the mid lane. These are basically ADCs, so champions with auto attack reliant damage, so very auto attack like DPS damage, and they're played in the mid lane. These are very meta reliant most of the time, and some of these are also like a hybrid between assassin and ADC, so a very specific niche type of gameplay. But it's out there, so if you're interested in that, you can play it, and we're gonna cover it later on in this video. Alright, so now that we talked about all the 5 different categories, we're gonna go more in depth on each and every category, and we're going to start with the mages. So hopefully now you already have an idea of what the mages are all about. But if not, don't worry, because we're going to go very in depth, and every character that you see here, we're going to try and put it in its own tier to show you what it brings to the table. So for mages, we have, we have 4 different types of mages. So we have the control mages, we have the burst mages, the artillery mages, and the battle mages. Now, why would you pick either one of these 4? Well, it depends on what you're interested in. First of all, the control mages. The name says it itself. These are mages that want to control the game. Now, that might not give you too much information, so let me specify it a little bit. Control mages are oftentimes a very well-rounded, balanced, complicated champions. Because control mages, most of the time, they are long range, they have skill shots, they have also CC and some peel for their team, most of the time. So they basically have a little bit of everything. And that little bit of everything can help them control the game in each and every situation. So they're very well-rounded, balanced champions that are useful in almost every single situation. All right, let's move to the second page, or to the second category, burst mages. This is a more specific type of mages where they're not always going to be good, or at least not all of these champions are always going to be good in every single game. They are less well-rounded, less balanced, but that also means that they're better in a certain thing. Burst mages are better in bursting down enemies. So these are very good against other low HP, squishy type champions to just one-shot the enemy high-value targets. Now, if the enemies have a lot of tanks, you can already think that these champions, their burst damage is going to be relatively useless against champions who are very, very tanky. So they are a little bit less versatile, but they are, of course, very strong for one-shotting enemies. Then we have artillery mages. Artillery mages are basically control mages, but with super long range and typically a little bit less self-peel. So these are mages with super, super long range. They sit on the other side of the map and they start hitting the enemy team from the most safe position as possible. And typically the enemy assassins and burst mages are hunting for the artillery mages and the enemy team. All right, so if range is your kind of thing, if you like to stand in the backline of your team and just hit enemies from afar, artillery mages are really going to be totally your thing. All right, and now we go to the battle mages. This is my favorite type of mages together with the control mages, and the battle mages are very interesting because these are mages that they love team fighting and they really like to stick around. Right? They don't want to just go in and get out. No, they want to stick around in the team fights. They want to stay close to the action, fight skirmishes, things like that. So we're going to be, that's why we call them battle mages. They love to battle, and all out battles, just joining the team fights. All right, now these are the 4 types, but again, as you can see, within every single type or tier, there are so many champions. And it's like, okay, if you like a control mage, who do you pick? There's like, I don't know, like off of the top of my head, there's like 12 champions or something, right? So like, who do you pick? That's what we're going to be looking at right now. So we're going to start with the control mages. So let's see. Within the control mages, I split them up in, again, 4 different tiers. Now, keep in mind, all these control mages are relatively the same. They're relatively the same. So they're all good at controlling the game, right? That's their basic fundamental. However, if I really had to define them in different categories, I would say that some control mages are better than scaling than other. Some control mages have more utility than the other ones. Some control mages accelerate at lane control and map control more than the other ones. And some mages or some control mages have higher burst than the other control mages. So keep that in mind. That's how you have to view it, because these are not the burst mages. No, they're control mages that have more burst than the average control mage. That's how you have to view it, for example. All right, let's get started with the scaling mages. All right, so within the control mages here, or the scaling mages, we have Veigar, Aesol, Orianna, Hui, and Azir. Now, the name says it itself. These champions tend to scale better than the other champions. I'll actually use purple for that, so it's a bit more visible. But these champions scale a little bit better than the other champions. Now, what is scaling? It means that they become very, very strong in the mid to late game portion of the game, right? So they become very, very strong then. So it's not like you have to force a lot in the early game. No, you really become stronger the longer the game goes on. Then we go to utility, and utility, these are just the control mages with a little bit more utility than the other ones, or a little bit more useful utility. Maybe not more utility, but maybe their spells are just a bit more useful in terms of utility. For example, we have Twisted Fate here. Twisted Fate has a very good spell, a gold card is which we call it, so where he can stun enemies, and it's a very low cooldown, so he can do it consistently. So he's very, he brings a lot of utility to the table. Then we have Malzahar. Malzahar literally has an ultimate where he keeps an enemy in place for like a couple of seconds and deals a lot of damage. So a single target lockdown. That's like insanely good for the team. It offers a lot of utility to the team to kill an enemy champion or pick off an enemy champion. And then Talia, she's a bit of a special case, but she offers utility with her ultimate in the form of map control, in the form of keeping enemies stuck, in the form of giving her team a map advantage due to her ultimate. She also has good CC with her WE. So she's more like controlling team fights, and that's like how she brings utility to the table. Now, I could have put Talia also in like the lane control plus map control, but it's not necessary. Like, again, it doesn't matter too much. She's also very good at lane control and map control. I literally could have put her there. For me, I just view her more from a utility perspective rather than really controlling the game. I feel like she's more of a assisting mid laner more than a mid laner who really controls the game and controls the entire map constantly and pressures it. You definitely can, right? You definitely can, and that's why I think you can put her here. It depends on the opinion of the player. All right, then we go to lane control plus map control. And these are champions that indeed just want to control the entire map. So the standard control mages, the most controlled form of it, and that's Syndra, Anivia, Nico, and Victor. Again, I think you could add Orianna to this list, right? I think you could add her there, but I do believe Orianna scales pretty strongly and more in a different way than these type of champions. I feel like Orianna, due to her big AoE ult in late game that deals so much damage, and like it offers, like if you hit an entire team, it does so much damage compared to like a Syndra ultimate, for example. That's why I would say she's a bit more scaling oriented rather than the Syndra, even though Syndra also scales ridiculously well. But again, at this point, it's all about the details. So here for lane control and map control, Syndra, most people think that she is not really lane controlling and map controlling. I would say yes, because in higher elo, they tend to build ability haste builds on Syndra to constantly have her E up for like every 5 seconds. And that's how you make picks. That's how you control the map. That's how you control team fights. And that's how you basically get control over the entire game. So that's from that perspective, from a higher elo perspective, I think Syndra definitely belongs in the lane control plus map control. Otherwise, I would put her into like a high burst, for example. So Syndra could be put in high burst as well. But again, I think it's better to put her in lane control plus map control from a higher elo perspective. All right, then we have Anivia, Nico, Victor. I think there's nothing wrong with these champions. They're all deserving to be here. I wouldn't put them anywhere else. Then we have the high burst champions, and this is where, again, it gets a little bit weird because many of these control mages have the opportunity, like almost all of them have the opportunity to one-tap enemies. With that being said, I need to put these champions in a specific tier, and it's not because Orianna can one-shot somebody with her ult, that therefore she has as much burst than Mel or Lissandra. Well, she has as much burst, But what I'm trying to say is champions like Mel and Lissandra are very reliant on the burst. They kind of have to do it. That's their playstyle. Now for Mel, that's a little bit different. Mel we could have put her into the here or even in the scaling one, right? So, but again, I believe Mel has, with her ultimate, she has an insane amount of burst in team fights. That's why I will put her in the burst section, and she doesn't scale as well as any of these other champions, I would say. That's why that was like for me the deciding factor to put her in the high burst. And then we have Lissandra. Lissandra definitely is in high burst because her job is to really get deep into an enemy team comp and then just ult somebody. So get very deep and burst somebody. That is what Lissandra wants to do. So she does offer utility, but it's more so that her gameplay really revolves around high burst. So that's what I wanted to say about all of this. Now, again, this is the most advanced champion pool guide that you've ever seen. And to hold up the promise, I'm not just going to stop here because we haven't put every single champion in a specific tier yet. So that's what we're going to do right now. So if we look at the scaling tab and we look at the difference between Veigar, Aesol, Orianna, Hwaya, and Azir, we can bring it down to this. All right, so if you wanted to pick a control mage that is defined by its scaling quality compared to the other control mages, we can go even deeper and then we can say, okay, one of these champions could be for you, but what's the difference between these champions? They're all control mages, they're all pretty well scaling. So what is the most deciding factor to pick one of these champions? Well, it's very simple. Veigar, for me, is the highest or the best pure damage scaling. And I'll go here, highlight pure damage scaling. He has infinite scaling and it's insane how quickly he stacks his damage. But Aesol is his direct competitor in the sense that Aesol is the best AoE damage scaling. That means for me personally, Aesol is the highest damage or highest scaling, best scaling champion from this list, even though I say that Veigar has the best pure damage scaling. Because Veigar in late game will do a lot more single target damage than in Aesol. And for me, scaling also has to do with how much range do you have? Do you have an easy time applying your damage to an entire team or only to just one person? And for me, Aesol has an easy time to apply his damage to a lot of people at the same time, making him my favorite for best scaling champion from the entire list. And then Veigar is also very good scaling, but it's a little bit more single target in late game. All right, with that being said, let's move on to the hybrid damage plus utility. This is very important. The plus, these people have damage, maybe not as much as the Veigar and the Aesol, but they have a lot of damage. And on top of that, they have a very good combination between damage and utility. Orianna has utility with her shield, with her movement speed that she can offer both to herself and her teammates, and her ultimate, where the ultimate deals a lot of damage, but it's also like a very big knock-up. And it's also basically like a displacement. So it offers a lot of CC for her team as well. Same with Azir. Azir deals a lot of damage and his ultimate as well, but his ultimate is not powerful because it deals that much damage. It's super powerful because it can displace an entire enemy team and put them into a bad spot on the map or maybe shuffle them in your own team. And that's why the champion is so good. So both Azir and Orianna have a lot of damage. I would say Azir scales better than Orianna though. But other than that, they're kind of similar. And then we have Hwaya, and I would say Hwaya is the best for utility. And again, I tried my best to put all of these champions in their own category. So does that mean that Hwaya is a utility-based champion? Definitely not. You need to remember where we come from, right? We're talking not about utility champions, we're talking about control mages, we're talking about the best scaling control mages, and within the best scaling control mages, we're looking for a minor difference between all these champions. So Hwaya is still a scaling control mage, but he has a little bit more utility than all the other champions here. That's how you have to view this. Because Hwaya has, he can give shields to himself and his teammates, he can give himself and his teammates mobility, he can choose to fear the enemies, to root them, he can choose how to do it. It's insane how much tools Hwaya has. That's for me why he is the utility god of this list. But okay, that's that. So now we can move on to the next part. If I can change here to my cursor, there we go. We can change on to the next part. And now we're going to, so if I go a little bit back here to show you guys what I'm talking about. So we were talking about the control mages. And now we talked about the difference between all the scaling champions. Now we're going to talk about the difference between the utility-based champions, right? Within the control mages. So let's take a look. So within the control mages, if you look at the control mages with the most utility to offer for their team, we're looking at Malzahar, Twisted Fate, Talia. What's the difference between these champions? For me, Malzahar, single target lockdown, right? his R is super, super important, right? He R's enemies. That's the main tool that he has for like lockdown. And it's super, super clear. That sets him apart from all the other mid laners. What sets Twisted Fate apart from all the other mid laners? He also have lots of utility, but his global utility, right? His R is global, right? Global. So he can hit everywhere on the map where he wants to. And that's the real strength of Twisted Fate. He is very good for picking off enemy champions and helping his teammates in moments of need. Because he can literally directly teleport to his teammates wherever they are on the map. That's so strong about Twisted Fate. Also, his ultimate gives like an insane amount of vision. He sees, if you activate your ultimate on Twisted Fate, you see the entire enemy team where they are standing for a couple of seconds. So that's also extremely like a big global utility. That is what separates him from something like Malzahar. And then Talia. Talia also has a global ult. Right? It works differently than Twisted Fate, but it's also a global ult. And she also has decent CC with her E and W. So what makes her so different from the other ones? Versatility. Talia is a lot more versatile, I would say, than a Malzahar. In the end, for example, a Malzahar, ultimately, he's only that useful because he can ult somebody and like lock them down. Right? That's basically what he offers. If he struggles to do that in a game because enemies are positioning really well, then he doesn't really have too much outplay potential or anything he can really change about that. Whereas Talia has a lot more room to play around with positioning with her ultimate, and she has a lot more room with her W and E usage. It's a lot more versatile. So she is, I would say, the best versatile utility-based control mage, if that makes sense. All right, now let's move on to the other ones. And if we go back here, so what were the other ones? The other ones that we're going to talk about now is going to be the lane control plus map control champions. So Syndra, Anivia, Nico, Victor, and we're going to see what the difference is between them. So let me, if I can find it at least. All right, there we go. So in terms of lane control and map control, these are the 4 champions that I think are very strong. They all dominate the lane and they have an easy time controlling the game. Why is that? What's the difference between them? Purely based on engage, like Syndra, Anivia, and Victor, they cannot engage and they do not want to engage an enemy team. Nico wants to engage on an enemy team. That's the main deciding factor to put her in a different spot than these other 3. She loves engage and get like a very good ult angle onto an entire enemy team. So if you like a control mage with tools to zone enemies from objectives, and that's pretty strong in lane, but you feel like you lack like the initiative to by yourself go into a team, and you don't want to wait for your teammates to do that for you, you can play Nico. She's going to be a great champion for you. All right, now if we go to zoning and teamfight control, which are the best champions? Again, we're talking about zoning and teamfight control. For me, Anivia and Syndra, Anivia literally has her W. It's a wall that can stop enemies from coming to an objective or walking through somewhere. Her ultimate also is a very big slow and keeps enemies in place and forces them to like walk around it. So gives her a lot of zoning and teamfight control. Now you might think Victor has his W. That's like a truly zoning tool. Syndra doesn't have that. So why is Victor here and Syndra there? Well, for me, it's simple. Again, Syndra in the lower elo is more considered a burst mage and assassin. In higher elo, we build ability haste to get her E on as much cooldown as possible and constantly fish with your E for a pick to catch somebody off guard, and then so your teammates can kill them. Or you can kill them with the help of your teammates. That's what you're truly trying to do. So when you're taking a dragon, you can constantly fish for E's and keep enemies away from you. Otherwise, if they get stunned, they might die, and it's very good for you. So zoning and teamfight control is, that's Syndra, her bread and butter in the higher elos. Then we go to best poke and teamfight damage. Victor has a bit more range than the Syndra, so that makes him to have best poke. And also, teamfight damage is super important here. Syndra can do indirectly a lot of damage. Even though she's single target, she has a single target ultimate, she can still deal a lot of damage by stunning enemies, and then her teammates can finish off that enemy for her. So indirectly, she can deal a shit ton of damage AoE. But Victor, he can do it himself with his ultimate. His ultimate is a very big AoE ult that only expands and expands and expands throughout the fight. So he is, for me, the best teamfight damage champion here by far. So that's something that you can look at. And he combines, like, Nico can also do like a lot of damage, but she lacks maybe the poke that Victor has. Victor has easier poke, right? So for me, it's the best combination between poke and teamfight damage here. That's what sets Victor apart. All right, with that being said, let's move on to the other one here. And these are the burst mages within the control mages. So the champions with the most burst damage from all the control mages. And then how can we separate them? What's the difference between Mel and Lissandra? I already talked about it a little bit before we went, before when we were talking about everything in general, is that for me, Mel, she can do a lot of damage with her R, so she can do a lot of burst damage with her R, but she also can do a shit ton of poke. So she has lots of burst, but also lots of poke. And that combination is what makes Mel so strong. And that's different from Lissandra, because Lissandra is shorter ranged, so she can't really deal a lot of poke, but she can deal a lot of burst, and she has engage potential. Again, you don't have to wait for your team to engage. You can be the engage yourself. So that's like the main difference between these two champions. All right, so now I want to take a look at the burst mages. So as explained before, the burst mages are just a category of mages. And what's the difference with control mages? Well, control mages are the very standard mages in the game. They have a little bit of everything. They're very balanced. They are good in every situation. And then the other type of mages are going to be a little bit more specific, and they're going to be good at something specific. That also means that they're going to be a little bit less well-rounded. And the burst mages are probably the most clear example of that. And we're going to start with probably the best burst mage, or like the most, not the best, that's not the right word, but like the most typical burst mage in the game, like the best example of it. So that's going to be LeBlanc. What's the difference between all these burst mages? Well, LeBlanc for me is the most standard burst mage in the sense that she can easily one-tap somebody like an assassin. She also has an amazingly strong lane. The problem with her is if you fall behind, yeah, it's very difficult to get back into the game. If you play versus a tanky champion, you're going to struggle with dealing damage. So it's all about really targeting squishy champions, like playing like an assassin and just taking them down with a lot of burst potential. The thing here is she doesn't only have single targets, she can also deal lots of AoE damage in team fight. But for me, what really separates her from all the other ones is the fact that she has such a strong, ridiculous lane. She can literally almost solo kill everybody at level 3, so it's a very, very strong champion, both in terms of burst damage through the mid and late game, but also through a very strong laning phase. Alright, then we go to Zoe, and I'm not gonna lie, I should probably take Zoe here, together with Lux, as they're very similar champions. Zoe has her bubble mechanic, where she really wants to poke enemies, snipe them from a very long distance. So you could view Zoe a little bit as one of the very own, or like maybe like Lux as well. Like Lux and Zoe are like very close to being the only very long range champions that are somewhat like assassins or burst mages, right? So in my opinion, if you want to assassinate people from a very long distance, Lux is going to be your go-to, or Zoe is going to be your go-to. I didn't put them in the same tier, because for me, Zoe has long range. For me, Lux is all about sniping with her ultimate, because it's basically like you can ult somebody half around the map. So it's like a global ult. Therefore, I would say Lux is a little bit even better in the zoning and sniping. Whereas, or like specifically in like the sniping, where Zoe is also pretty good in the zoning, but she's more like poking and long range style, a little bit less than the Lux ultimate. But they're very, very similar. I could just literally put them in the same category. Alright, but that's what, like if you're into the long range assassination type playstyle, Lux or Zoe is going to be your bang for your buck. If you want a mix, you could actually go for Vex here. Vex also has a global ultimate that you could use to assassinate people from a distance. The difference is you're not going to stay in your position. You're not going to stay very far away from the fight and then assassinate people. No, from very far in the fight, you can ult people and then engage onto them. So you're still getting onto them. That's the difference between the Lux and the Zoe. Now, Vex here is anti-dive and anti-mobility. So she is very niche in that aspect, where she has a fear in her passive, where if people try to jump onto her, she can stop them from doing that basically. So very good anti-dive. And also she can deal extra damage, and she's very effective versus champions that have high mobility. So she's a bit more of a niche / counter pick versus champions like a Silas, a Yasuo, an Akali, an Irelia, things like that. Then we're gonna go to Annie. Annie is probably from this entire list the easiest to play champion. So Annie has lots of reliable damage. She can also hit an entire team, but the thing is she is very easy to play. Her laning phase is a lot weaker than something like a LeBlanc, for example, but once she gets level 6, she's probably the champion with the most reliable and easy one-shot potential in the game. She does lack a little bit mobility as well, so even though you have like lots of damage with your ultimate, you lack mobility, so that makes it a little bit difficult to get onto champions. But that's also then, like, typically if you have a champion with a dash, that makes your champion more complicated and more difficult to play. But other than that, let's move on to Brand. Brand is your best AoE option. So Brand wants to hit an entire team at the same time. Now, don't get me wrong, Brand can do a lot of DPS. So he's not necessarily a full burst mage. However, I put Brand in the burst mage category because typically Brand likes to do his entire combo with an ult at once in the enemy team, then let the ult bounce and just deal a burst amount of damage. And that's typically what he wants to do. Like one good ability rotation suffices for Brand to be very, very valuable in a team fight. He can do more ability rotations, but typically one ability rotations with a well-timed ultimate is going to be his main burst. That's why I also put him here between AoE, but he has also a lot of DPS and a lot of AoE damage. Most of all these champions, I would say, he has the biggest AoE damage. Alright, then we're gonna move to Ahri. She is a jack of all trades, and that makes her very blind pickable, and that's the main difference between everyone on the list. Ahri is perhaps not a true, or doesn't have to be a true burst mage. She can literally be everything. Ahri has good wave clear, she has CC, she has mobility, so she's safe. She doesn't really have any bad matchups in the lane, so you can always blind pick her, and then when enemies try to counter you, they cannot really counter you because you don't really have bad matchups. You can play against tanks by building good items that are good into tanks. Your champion works with that because your champion can deal consistent damage. You can also burst enemy champions, so you can build more assassin type playstyle. So you're a very jack of all trades. You can be very well rounded. The thing is, again, that's why she comes a little bit closer to a control mage, right? Because she has so many tools to control the game in any state. However, for the majority of the playstyles, she is played as a burst mage most of the time, right? That's why I put her in a burst mage category. But she's a jack of all trades, and that is what makes her different than everyone else. Then we have Diana. She's probably the only fighter / burst mage in the game. Any of these champions here, they're not really fighters. But Diana has a lot of AoE damage with her ultimate. She can hit an entire team and burst an entire team all at once. But on top of that, she's not squishy. She's also a fighter, right? So I'll write it down once more so that you guys really understand. Because Diana is not the type of champion that goes in and then she's squishy and she dies. No. She can continue to fight. She can stay onto people. She's relatively tanky, right? She has a shield. Now, the next up is artillery mages. So these were all the 4 artillery mages. And now we're going to see, so within the artillery mages, what is the difference between them? Now, if you forgot, artillery mages are mages with super long range, where you sit in the back of your teammates and just hit enemies from afar. Those are the artillery mages. So it's very, very simple. What is the difference between them? First of all, Xerath. Xerath is the longest range, so extreme long range. He's the longest range artillery mage from them all. So it's very simple. You like the idea of an artillery mage, and you really want to be the longest range artillery mage in the game, so always hitting from the backline, then Xerath is for you, right? It's as simple as that. Valkos also has long range. Keep in mind, they all have long range. He does have slighter long range than, less long range than Xerath, but he does have true damage in his kit, which is very, very strong, and perhaps offers a little bit more CC. His ultimate slows, his Q slows quite significantly, and his E is a knockup. So perhaps a little bit more CC, and also the true damage is very, very important here. If you're playing against tanks, Valkos can still do lots of damage. Then we have Ziggs, also very long range. What sets him apart from the other champions? Sieging and objective control. Ziggs has an ability, E, that he can literally place somewhere in an entrance, and then when people walk through it, they will take a shit ton of damage. He also has an ability, W, that can literally knock them away from something or knock them into something. That gives him a lot of control in terms of objective fighting. Now also, his W can be used for taking turrets very, very quickly. So he's also very good at sieging, and that's probably the #1 quality why Ziggs is different from the other champions. If you like to take turrets as fast as possible, sieging, right, then Ziggs is definitely your way to go. Then we have, for last but not least, we have Seraphine, and she is more utility-based. She is also a support in the bot lane. That's why she is a utility-based mid laner as well. As Seraphine, you have long range, but you're not that strong typically, so you're looking more to nullify the lane, to make sure that you don't have to fight too much, you just push in the waves. And then in team fights, you play around your ultimate to really CC or charm an entire team so that your teammates can now finish off the enemies. That's basically what you're looking for. So Seraphine is not really that poke based compared to all the other artillery mages. It's not about constantly poking. Seraphine is more about just nullifying the lane, and then in team fights, trying to hit a very good ultimate. That's not necessarily the case for the other champions, even though they, of course, also like to hit their ultimate. But all right, that's it for these guys. Now, let's move on to the next thing. And the next thing that we're going to talk about are the battle mages, my personal favorite mages. All right, so this is, again, going to be a little bit difficult, but we'll try and put every mage or every battle mage into its different category. So we're going to start with Cassiopeia, and she's very good for DPS and anti-dive, but mainly DPS. From all these champions, she might have the most damage per second. Because what is Cassiopeia? She's short range, but she likes to constantly hit people. She wants to get in a fight and run them down and constantly eat them, constantly hit them. Don't give them a break. Don't let them heal up. Don't let them walk away. Just run them down and constantly hit them. And then when the enemies want to turn onto you and jump onto you to kill you, because they're sick of you running them down, you have literally a way, an ultimate to stun them. And that's the anti-dive that I'm talking about. They can't really jump onto you, but you can easily run them down. So a lot of DPS. Now, the weakness of Cassiopeia, she's a bit more of a, I would write niche. I cannot write, guys, but I'll write niche here. And that's because in laning phase, she can easily get stomped if she plays against a very long-range champion like Xerath, because she's so short-ranged. All right, then we have the engage/disrupt champions. Very difficult, to put these champions in one tier. It's very difficult, but I try to do my best. And we'll talk about them, what separates them. Now, engage, disrupt, with that, I mean, you try to disrupt a team. If the enemy team wants to do a big team fight, make sure that their entire positioning from everyone is screwed and now they can't team fight properly anymore, or you engage onto the enemies and surprise them. That's what this category is about. Then we have the utility-based ones. Utility are again, support champions that are played mid lane. And of course, by default, then they will offer a lot of support for your team and a lot of utility for the team rather than dealing lots of damage themselves. Now, I said that these are battle mages, and you might ask, well, if they're support champions, how are they battle mages? How do we constantly want to fight in a team? They're not really battle mages themselves, but I did put them here or define them as utility battle mages because I believe that their job is to keep their teammates as long as possible in the fight. So they try to turn their teammates into battle mages by constantly giving them speed ups, heals, shields, revival, right? That's what they try to do. So rather than being a battle mage themselves, they really try to turn their teammates into battle mages. So that's why I put them under utility battle mages. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, and then we have the hyper carries or the ultra scaling battle mages. So these are typically the strongest mages in the game in terms of team fighting and doing raw amount of damage in a team fight and wiping an entire team. These are going to be the strongest mages in the game for that. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely pick one of these three champions up. And yeah, you can already guess, this one here is my favorite champion in the entire game. And more about that later. But then here we have a drain tank, and this is something a bit different than a battle mage, but I did put it under battle mage because yeah, he is still a mage, but he wants to get into a fight and he doesn't want to get out. He doesn't want to do this. He doesn't want to go in and out. He only wants to go in, right? So only one way. Only wants to go in, never wants to go out. This doesn't happen. Always want to go in. Right? That's what he basically wants to do. Get into the enemy team's face, tank as much damage as possible. Just keep them busy and just get up in the middle of the enemy team. If that's something that you like, you can definitely pick up Swain because I think he's the only champion who can really do that in the mid lane. We have a couple, some of these battle mages are pretty decent at doing it, but not like Swain. Swain is the best in just being a complete drain tank. All right, now, with that being said, let's see if we can define them or go a little bit more in depth even more. So I would say, let's start with the first one. So here, if I go back, let me quickly explain this, what we're going to do. So Cassiopeia is already in her own tier, right? Same for Swain. But we're going to see what the difference is between the engage/disrupt champions, what the difference is between Zillion and Karma here in the utility champion tier list, and we're going to look at the differences between the hyper carry/ultra scaling champions. There are three champions, but is there a difference between them? Which one should you pick up? So we're going to look at that as well. So first and foremost, we're going to look at the disrupt/engage champions. What's the difference? First and foremost, Silas is very ultimate dependent, so ult disruptor. He steals the ultimates from the enemy team. So very versatile, creative champion that can be used in many team comps. But But if you're playing versus an enemy team comp with bad ultimates that you can't really do anything with, yeah, you're not going to be that useful. Now, if he has good ultimates, he can disrupt an entire team by surprising them and picking them off guard completely. And also he offers a lot of pick off potential. Really, if your team engages, Silas wants to be like instantly following that up, like instantly jumping that up. He is not necessarily like the type of champion who needs to jump in like by himself all alone as a first dude. He can, but typically you want to wait for a tank to jump in and then you can instantly follow it up so that you don't have to tank all the enemy damage and CC. Then we go to Aurora. Aurora is, in my opinion, also a disruptor because her ultimate is like a big AoE ultimate that is really stopping enemies from like walking where they want to walk, from escaping. And that's what I definitely call disrupting an entire enemy team. Rumble also kind of does that. But the difference between Aurora and Rumble is that Rumble's job is to really deal as much damage as possible with his ultimate in an AoE burst. And then that's basically it. What Aurora wants to do is not just that. Her ultimate is more a disrupting tool than a pure damage tool, and therefore she also has a little bit more consistent pressure and control due to her abilities being a little bit more long range than the Rumble, and she's a little bit more mobile, I would say, to play around and reposition in a team fight to constantly pressure enemies. All right, and then we go to Heimerdinger, and Heimerdinger is a bit of a weird champion, but I would put him under zoning and objective control. Heimerdinger is the type of champion that wants to place some turrets onto the map, make sure enemies can't capture that territory because you're sitting there with your turrets, and just whenever they want to walk up, you try to stun them, try to hit them with your turrets, that kind of playstyle. Now, the downside of Heimerdinger is that he has a bit of a weird lane where his turrets will automatically push every single wave, and that means that you're not going to learn that many wave mechanics on Heimerdinger. So that's a skill that's not really going to transfer over to any other champions. That's why in the beginning, on the guidance slide, I showed you that it's a champion that I wouldn't recommend to play. That's the reason why. All right, but now we go to the utility champions here, the utility battle mages, and let's see what the difference is there. Oh, all right. So I made it myself easy because it was very difficult for me to find a difference between these two because basically they just want to help out their team. Now, the one thing I would say is that Zillion is a bit better at helping out his team. He literally has an ultimate to revive somebody in his team, but that also means that he's a bit more team reliant. He doesn't really do a lot for himself. He's more team reliant and he needs the team to do something. With Karma, that's also the case, but she has a little bit more self-peel, or like it's easier for her to apply her damage to the enemy team as well without needing teammates. So I would say she's a little bit less team reliant. In the mid lane as well, in the laning phase, she is a little bit more dominant in the laning phase and can definitely bully some type of champions. For Zillion, you're mainly going to look at nullifying the lane, avoiding to play the lane most of the time, and roaming a bit more to help your teammates out. So he's a bit more team reliant in that regard. All right, now we go to my favorite my favorite point of discussion, and that's going to be the hyper carries, the ultra scaling battle mages, so the strongest mages in the game in terms of team fighting. That is Vladimir, Kassadin, and Ryze. Now, let's start with my favorite champion, and that is obviously Vladimir, and he is a teamfight god, and I'm not even exaggerating when I say that he is a teamfight god. He has an ability, his W, that makes him untargetable. And that allows him to engage on an enemy team and really deal as much damage as possible with all his AoE damage to an entire team at the same time. But his W is what really allows him to engage on enemies or make sure that he can follow up the engage of his team onto the enemy team. Whereas if you compare that to something like Ryze, Ryze has also a lot of AoE damage, but more DPS. He doesn't deal as much burst as Vladimir does. Vladimir is more of like, I engage, deal as much damage as possible like an assassin, and then you wait for the cooldowns again, but the main burst has been done. Ryze is more constantly hitting enemies with insane AoE DPS, right? Damage per second, it's insane. Problem is, he doesn't have an ability like Vladimir, like a W, he doesn't have that. So he can't really engage himself. He's more team reliant, and it's better for him if enemies try to get onto him so he can kite away and hit them while kiting away. That's really what he likes to do, and standing into the front backline behind his own front line so enemies are not targeting him. So that's the difference between Ryze and Vladimir. He is more of a DPS dealer but needs his team a little bit more and needs to think of positioning a bit more, where Vladimir is more of like a teamfight god through a more assassin type playstyle. And then we have Kassadin, and he is completely different than these two. He is super mobile and therefore also assassin type playstyle in the sense that he really wants to go in and then he wants to go out. And then repeat that, right? I'll use this sign here to repeat that, right? So Kassadin wants to like ult in, like jump in, kill somebody, jump out. That's typically the playstyle for Kassadin. right? Because you're quite squishy, you can easily get one-tapped, right? You don't have an ability to make you untargetable, but you do have a lot of mobility. So it's constantly repositioning in teamfight. And constantly jumping over a wall, catching somebody off guard, one-tapping them, getting out. If that's the type of playstyle that you like, then this is a perfect champion for you. All right, that's it for the battle mages. Now we can move on to the assassins. So keep in mind, if we went all the way here, these are all the assassins. Now we're going to split these up into groups as well, and we're going to start by splitting them up based on damage type. All right, so now we're going to split them up by damage type, right? So the other champions, like the mages, they're all AP, right? But now when we go to assassins, we have AD and AP. And this is where it becomes interesting. In the beginning of the video, I said that generally speaking, it's good to have both AD champions in your champion pool plus AP champions. So that could be something to look at. And then here, if you already have a mage in your champion pool, no matter what type it is, you could go for an AD champion by going into the AD assassin. For example, that's how you could make up your champion pool. All right, now if you already play an AD assassin, maybe you can fill up your champion pool with an AP assassin, right? So it depends on what you're looking for. Now the AD champions are Zed, Talon, Neferi, Qiyana. AP assassins, Kali, even though she has some AD damage, so she has some AD damage and she is sometimes played hybrid. You're mainly playing her AP. And then we have Fizz, Echo, they're both AP, and then Katarina again. Most of the time she's built AP, but you can build her AD. You can build her hybrid. A little bit like Akali, but Akali is 99% of the time built AP. Katarina is more like 60-40, I would say. All right, so now we're going to make some more distinctions. Let's start with the AD ones. What's the difference between the AD assassins? All right, let's start with that one. Okay, so again, very simple. Neferi, easy to play. That's what makes her stand out from all the other ones. That's really simple. Right, because League of Legends literally created this champion because most assassins are very mechanical and hard to play. And they said, no, we want to create a champion, an assassin that's easy to play. So Neferi is easy to play. So if you're scared of like having to play like or putting a lot of time into an effort into an assassin, but you really like the assassin playstyle, then Neferi is your bread and butter. That's what you want to go with, easy to play and an assassin. I also wrote down all-in potential. With that, I mean Neferi is a type of assassin where you literally lock in on an enemy champion. You literally jump onto them and then try to kill them. Very straightforward. All right, then we have Talon. Everybody here in this list can one-shot enemies, but what sets Talon apart is the fact that he's extremely mobile. So that forces him to roam and flank. Or like not forces him, but gives him the opportunity to. If you play Talon, it's a little bit similar like Kassadin, but like Kassadin is only strong in mid and late game, where he can constantly jump around and kill people. Talon is like an early game Kassadin, where you can constantly jump over walls. You're super strong in the early game, so you're basically constantly hunting enemies, jumping over a wall in the enemy jungle and surprising the enemy jungler, killing him. Going to the enemy bot lane and double killing the bot lane by surprisingly showing up there by jumping over a wall. Right, that's the type of playstyle that Talon wants to do. So it's very much macro, so if I can write here, so macro, so like moving onto the map. You really feel that you're a mid laner when you play Talon, because you move a lot on the map. So a lot of macro. Then we have Zed. Zed is all about outplaying 1v1s. Every assassin is good at killing people in a 1v1, but Zed, he also wants to roam, but he's not as mobile as a Talon. But with his shadow mechanic, he has a lot of outplay potential to kill people and escape in a 1v2 or a 2v2 or 1v1. Things like that. So a lot of outplay potential on this champion. Very mechanical, a lot of outplay potential. If that's something that you're into, definitely play Zed. And then we have Qiyana. Qiyana, teamfight. That's it for me, teamfight potential. She has her terrain mechanics where if she equips the grass with her W, she will have different ability on her Q than when she equips water on her W or when she equips stone, right? So terrain, this is the only champion in the game that really plays around terrain on the map. So it's a very niche mechanic. If that's something you're into, you can definitely play Qiyana. But from a more like actual gameplay perspective, in terms of like what's like different with like these other champions, the main thing I would say is teamfight potential. All these assassins are like not that strong in teamfight because they're more 1v1 oriented, whereas Qiyana can definitely do a lot in teamfight. She's a bit more teamfight oriented. Her spells are a bit more suited for teamfight, like her ultimate, for example. She can literally stun an entire team. So she's more like a teamfight potential assassin. So she's basically a little bit best of both worlds, where she's pretty strong in the early game and she has team fight potential, right? So it's a very difficult but fun champion to play and very useful champion to play. All right, that's the difference between all these assassins. Hopefully that clears things up a bit for you guys. And now we're going to talk about the AP assassins. So let's take a look. All right, so my favorite assassin here from all the assassins is by far Akali. And Akali is my favorite assassin because she's the most versatile assassin in the game, in my opinion. Why? She has mobility. So she has lots of mobility. She has lots of damage, right? She's good in the mid and late game. She scales really well. She's probably the best scaling ADC. She can become invisible with her Shroud. Her W mechanic is super important, right? Because this allows her to jump into an entire enemy team, use her W, become invisible, stall time for her team, giving her a lot of outplay potential in teamfights and 1v1s, but also giving her, in general, a lot of teamfight potential, which is very rare for an assassin. So she has a little bit of everything, and that's why I think Akali is she's my favorite champion because of that, and maybe you should also pick her up if you're interested in picking up an AP assassin. Super versatile, right? Also very good blind pickable. Then we have other champions like Fizz. Most assassins are slippery. Most assassins have high mobility, but Fizz is like extremely slippery. He's also a fish, right? That's why he's probably so slippery and highly evasive. But that's my opinion on it. His E is like a dash, but also while he's dashing, he's like untargetable. His Q is a dash, and his cooldowns are ridiculously low in mid and late game. That's why he's so slippery. Then we have Echo, also quite a slippery champion, but it's more about timing and he's more ult dependent. And that's like, Echo is more about turning around fights with his repositioning by his ultimate. Most assassins, they're very slippery, so they can like go in on a champion and just get out. With Echo, it's a little bit more difficult. With Echo, it's more about your ultimate. You want to go in and kill somebody, but then make sure that when you do your ult to get out, that your ult is in a good position to instantly re-engage onto somebody. So he goes back in time, it's like a rewind and repositions himself. If that's a concept that you really like, Echo is your guy, but it's really all about timing for all of his abilities, his W as well. He's all about taking the correct timing to all in. But he's an easy to play assassin, an easy to play AP assassin, and he's like the Nefiri from the AD champions. He's just easy to play. So I'll write it down as well. Easy, and that's always nice. All right, then we go to Katarina. Katarina, what sets her apart is actually a negative thing for me, is that compared to most assassins, she has quite a weak lane. Now, Akali also has a relatively weak lane, but I would say that her lane is stronger than Katarina. Katarina, I would say 90% of the matchups you're going to struggle in lane, but she is extremely strong in skirmishes and teamfights with her AoE damage and her resets. But it's a very intense champion to play. So compared to Ezreal, like definitely not equal, because Katarina is very intense. You need to play around your resets and ultimate. It's all about timing as well. So Echo is like the easy form of an assassin, then Katarina is like the most intense form you could probably have, but she has a very weak lane, and that's like what sets her apart from the other ones. All right, with that being said, let's move on to the other ones, and now we're going to look at the AD Bruisers and the Fighters. Good to keep in mind, this is the starting slide. Now we're going to look into here, the AD, Bruisers, and Fighters. So everyone in this tab. So let's move on to that. So first of all, let's start with Irelia. Why would you want to pick up Irelia? She's highly mechanical, super mobile. So mechanical, mobile, and she's a bruiser. What is her main strength? Great side laning. That's her main strength. Irelia is a champion for 1v1s, right? 1v2s, maybe. 2v2s. So 2v2s. She's that type of champion. She doesn't really want to team fight. So don't team fight on her. That's a bit of an exaggeration, right? Like, she's not the worst team fighter. She can definitely team fight, but she's a lot stronger in running people down in a 1v1, in a 1v2, like outplaying people with her mobility. That's where she really shines. Her team fight is not as good as some of these people here on the list. Now, for most of these bruisers, they're not going to be like that strong in terms of team fighting. Most of these bruisers are going to be really good at picking people off, running them down in the side lane, things like that. With an exception of the next one, Yone. He's very good at team fighting. He's like a hybrid. Yone is a bit weaker in early game compared to an Irelia, but once he gets like his first item, he starts getting actually pretty strong in running people down in 1v1s, outplaying them. But team fighting with his ultimate, that's what truly sets him apart from all the fighters here. He's the only one who can really get like a 5-man ulti on an entire team while also CCing them. Insane. He has insane team fight potential while being also so strong in the side lane. You don't see it that much in League of Legends in general, so I think it's one of the best AD champions to pick up. If I recommend AD champions to people that I coach, it's almost always Yone. Only downside, he is a bit mechanical as well, so it can feel a little bit difficult to play him. But other than that, he is a great champion to pick up in League if you need an AD champion in your champion pool. All right, then we go to his brother, literal brother, Yasuo. Yasuo is more mobile than Yone. He's super mechanical, and he has a knock-up mechanic. So Yasuo is, again, better in like the 1v1s, right? Just like Irelia, like 1v2s, 1v3s, 2v2s, right? That's where he really shines. But he is a little bit worse in team fighting again. So he's super mechanical, also very mobile, a little bit the same like Irelia, but I would say he has more team fight potential with his ultimate because he has a knock-up mechanic where if anybody in your team does a knock-up on somebody on the enemy team, you can pressure R and your ultimate will activate onto them. You can also do it yourself, but it's very difficult, so it's better to just rely on CC from your teammates, but that means you're a little bit more team comp dependent. So you're a bit more team comp dependent as Yasuo, and also super mechanical. I typically don't recommend people to pick him. If you want to simulate Yasuo's playstyle, you're better off playing Yone, I believe, because he is better in team fighting as well, a little bit easier to play, but he's less strong in the early game. Yasuo is already stronger in the early game. All right, then we have Pantheon. Strong early game burst. That's what really sets him apart. He is probably the highest damage here from all the champions in the early game. It's like an assassin, specifically in the mid lane. It's really like an assassin. With that being said, he is quite immobile. So I'll write it down here. He is quite immobile, which is quite weird for like a bruiser/fighter. They're typically quite mobile. He is immobile. That being said, he has his R that can literally make him fly across half the map. So is he that immobile? Well, take it with a grain of salt. His standard kit is quite immobile. So he deals a lot of burst, but he's also not that mobile, so it's not easy to get onto somebody. With this ultimate, that changes. Whereas Irelia, Yone and Yasuo love to be in the side lane and run somebody down, Pantheon loves to either group with his team and then fly to the side lane with his ultimate and surprise somebody in the side lane to pick them off, or do the opposite. He is in the side lane and he ults towards the team fight and then he joins it instantly. So that's what really sets him apart from the other champions, where side laning itself is played out a little bit differently. It's harder to kill somebody in the side lane, so you have to play it a little bit more macro based. So he's a bit more macro rather than perma side laning, basically. But that makes him very, very interesting. Then we have Ambessa. She is, for me, super versatile, just like Pantheon. She can both team fight relatively well because she's quite tanky. She has lots of mobility, and with her ultimate, she can play for assassin. So for me, the versatility of this champion is what is, that's like if you want an AD bruiser and you don't prefer a certain playstyle, just go with Ambessa. She's quite versatile. All right. Then we go to Jace. Jace is a bit of a weird one. He's highly mechanical, difficult to play, and he doesn't have an ultimate. He doesn't have it. If you activate ult on Jace, you get a new series of 3 different basic abilities. So you basically have 6 basic abilities, but no ultimate, rather than somebody with 3 basic abilities and an ultimate. Now, Jace has a melee, so melee form, and a range form. Meaning he's quite safe in a mid lane. You can play versus melee champions, but also versus range champions, because you can go into your range form and then just auto-attack from a distance. So he's quite safe. He's also super good at snowballing, like most of these champions. But what separates him apart here is, again, that he doesn't have an ultimate. So if you're somebody who really likes to have that one strong ability in your kit, Jace is not going to be for you. He does have an insane amount of like consistent damage in one go if you know how to play him. But okay, that's it about these guys. Let's move on to the next part. That's going to be about the tanks. So I'll quickly go back here. So now we're going to talk about these guys here, right? Well, I'll put my arrow here about the tanks and utility champions. That's who we're going to talk about right now. What's the difference? So I already told you in the beginning of the game, or in the beginning of the video, like what the difference is, or like why you should want to pick this up. If you need some engage in your team, if you need some tankiness in your team, you can pick one of these champions up. That's the main reason for picking one of these up. You need engage, you need some tankiness, you need some CC setup for your team. Right? Those are the main reasons. Now, what are the differences? These champions are not often played, so I would say from the get-go here, this champion is not played often, this champion is not played often, just this champion is not played often, this champion is not played often, and this champion is not played often. So the big winner is Galio. He's a true mid laner. The other ones are top laners or junglers. So this is the only mid laner. But the other ones you can play in the mid lane. Right? You definitely can. That's why I included them in this list. So what's then the difference? If you really need hard engage in your team, like you don't need as much AP, you already have lots of damage and lots of different damage sources in your team, like AD and AP, and you need like a tankiness or engage, you can definitely go with one of these two. Very tanky, a lot of engage, so they are your best bet. With Malphite, I would say that his ultimate gives him like the best engage from all these champions. So if you like to play a champion who literally jumps into an enemy team like a rock, which Malphite is basically, you definitely should go with Malphite. Zac has engaged with his E, but it's less good than Malphite are. So in terms of pure engage, I would say Malphite is better. But in terms of basic abilities, I would say that Zac has a little bit more creativity and versatility. So Malphite is more like the straightforward engage champion. Zac has also engaged, but a little bit more versatility on the side. All right, then we go with Cassante, very difficult champion to classify. He is very tanky, and then when he activates his ult, he turns all his tank stats into damage stats. So he's both tank and bruiser with like assassin type playstyle as well on his ultimate. Very difficult champion to classify. I don't recommend him because he has such a weird playstyle. I don't recommend him. That's why in the first slide, on the guidance slide, I told you guys to not play him. Or I put him in the spot in the tier to not play him. But that's because of this reason, because he's so weird. But yeah, is he bad? No, he can tank a lot. He can be very, very tanky. But he has a hard time engaging onto an enemy team. It's more like walking in there, taking up the enemy attention, taking damage. But rather than, like, you don't really engage as much as compared to a Malphite or a Zac. And it's a bit of a weird playstyle with the ultimate. So you can definitely play it. Very interesting champion, but it's very difficult to classify him. Then we go to Cho'Gath. It's a bit easier to classify him. Scaling is the answer here. So scaling, the champion scales extremely well. He scales the best out of all of these champions and is in fact one of the best scaling champions in the game. So he can become ridiculously tanky. He has insane amount of objective control. So for dragon fights and baron fights, he can easily keep the enemies away or can help his team catch enemies because he has lots of CC. His Q is a knockup, he has slows, he has a silence, so he can easily like really stick onto enemies and make sure they can't escape. It's a bit harder to escape yourself when enemies are running you down, but you can easily stick onto enemies. Also, his ultimate deals true damage, an insane amount of it. It outsmites junglers. So whenever an enemy team is doing Baron or Dragon and you're playing Cho'Gath, the enemies will have to make sure that you're dead before they take the objective, because you can literally just take it with your ultimate. All right, that's something interesting. Very good scaling tank, a little bit weaker in the early game, but very good for scaling. Then we have Galio, our only true mid laner, and his strength is engage and counter engage, I would say. So Galio is very good versus things like Sylas and Akali. Champions that in the early game really want to get onto you. He's very good at them. He's very good versus short range or melee type champions because he can literally just constantly CC them, right? Like E, W, like empowered auto attack with Q, you can literally easily CC them and stop them from getting onto you. So he's very good in that regard. So he has lots of engage, or like good engage, decent engage with good counter engage, and that's what makes him so strong. He's like a guardian, right? He stands in front of your carries, right? Can look to pick off enemies, to like E them and CC them, but can also defend your team. So pretty nice, actually. All right, and then what also sets him apart is his global ultimate with his R. Right, he can literally jump to his teammates, so to his team, and help his teammates. So again, he's really like a guardian angel, and that's really like, it's not so much about engaging yourself, it's really about sticking to your teammates, whereas Malphite can really do an engage on his own. And then we have Gragas, in my opinion, by far the most versatile champion of all of these here. You can play him AP, so full damage. You can play him tank to peel for your team. He's mobile, right? He's mobile, so many of those things. He's hard to catch and mechanical though, which is, you might think, is that a reason why I want to pick him up? Well, you might, because you might play tanks, but the problem is with tanks, most tanks are a little bit boring to play because they're quite easy to understand. Whereas Gragas has a lot of versatility. He's not as good as a tank as most of these champs, but he can be a decent tank. He can deal lots of damage. He's very mobile And he has that mechanical aspect that many of those people who play tanks might not have when they play true tank. So Gragas is like super versatile and very fun because he's like mechanical for like a tankier type of champion. But all right, that's it for the tanks. Right. And now we go to the last part, and that's the hybrid marksman. All right, and these are the only ones that I didn't really specify more than this. I didn't put any every champion in its own tier. I struggled a lot with doing this. So I didn't overcomplicate it and just put them like this. First of all, these are all type champions that normally aren't played mid lane that often, except for, I would say, Akshan. He's like a true mid laner other than like all the rest. And the reason for that is quite simple. They're all marksmen or marksman type champions. Marksmen, DPS, right? They're very reliant on auto attacks and they have lots of DPS, damage per second. So the standard marksman experience, if you like to play mid lane, and you like ADCs, but you hate playing with somebody in the bot lane, you can pick an ADC, but in the mid lane. So then you could pick for Lucian, Tristana, or Corki, right? You could go for either one of those. The problem is they're very meta dependent. So it very much depends on the meta. Right now, we are not in a meta where ADCs in the mid lane work that well. So if you're going to pick them, you're going to struggle. But sometimes you are in a meta where they work well. So keep that in mind. These are champions that, yeah, you might have very low win rate if you pick them up in the wrong meta. But otherwise, they can be very fun. Then we go to the hybrid ones. So these are champions that in theory rely quite a bit on auto-attacking, but they're not really assassins, not really ADCs. They're more of assassin type champions. Akshan, he can literally be invisible. He wants to run people down with their E. So he's more of an assassin type champion. Then we have Quinn. Her ultimate literally makes her a bird, right? Her ultimate makes her a bird, which makes her be able to roam a lot. She will get an insane amount of movement speed. She will roam a lot, and therefore she will be able to have a more assassin type playstyle where you flank enemies, come from behind them when they don't expect it, and that's how you play it. So it's like, yes, you rely quite a bit on your auto attacks, but it's more about assassin type playstyle. Then we have Smolder and Kale. They're both like similar to ADCs, but they're not really ADCs. Smolder is an AD scaling champion, and he is played ADC, but he feels a little bit more like a mage. So if you like the mage playstyle, but you need an AD champion, so maybe you already play mages, but you need an AD champion in your champion pool, you could go for Smolder. He's easy to play, he scales well like mages, and even though he is played like an ADC where his auto attacks can deal a lot of damage, you're mainly playing around your Q and W, so mainly playing around your abilities like a normal mage would. So for a mage main, picking up Smolder as an AD pick in your champion pool could be very interesting because he's very similar to a mage playstyle. And then we have Kale. Kale could potentially be between Rice, Cass, and Vladimir as the battle mages because she has a hyper scaling, but I did put her between the marksmen, because she relies very much on auto attacks, so AA, auto attacks, right? She's basically an ADC with an insane amount of damage. She scales insanely hard. She's one of the strongest late game champions in the game together with Kassadin, Rice, and Vladimir. But since she's more auto attack reliant rather than those other champions that I just named, that's why I call her, or why I put her between the marksmen. Now, you can also build her AD. She can be built a hybrid, but yeah, most of the time she's played AP. All right, that's it. I think we covered everything here. Let me quickly double check so we didn't forget anything. No. But with that being said, I'm going to end the video here. Thank you so much for watching. Go check the description to check out my Twitch and to check out my coaching if you're interested in that. And with that being said, hopefully I'll see you in my next video as well. Bye.